Alors effectivement, nous sommes très heureux d'accueillir cette dernière étape de rencontre autour de la recherche en art, autour de la notion d'expérimentation à l'appui de 4 témoignages d'artistes et de l'intervention d'un universitaire. Alors les artistes que nous avons invités ont en commun d'intégrer la recherche comme principe actif de leur démarche artistique, une recherche qui les conduit à sans cesse modifier, transformer les paramètres et les outils qui fondent leur pratique. Ces artistes œuvrent en souterrain, tous fascinés qu'ils sont par ce qui est caché, travaillant sur les seuils de visibilité entre la matérialité et l'immatériel. Alors leur pratique se situe dans l'écart, dans le doute, parfois dans la contradiction, prenant à rebours les représentations souvent archétypales, sédimentées, qui illustrent les représentations, qui illustrent les connaissances que nous avons du monde. Elles prennent également à rebours certains clichés, comme celui du jugement d'un artiste qui se doit d'être forcément sentimental. Donc l'objectif de ce matin n'est pas de travailler sur la recherche en soi, mais plutôt de montrer comment les artistes inventent un langage, développent des nouveaux points de vue et usages du monde. Donc les témoignages de ce matin permettront, nous l'espérons, d'éclairer les conditions de la rencontre entre le domaine de l'art et celui des sciences. Une relation entre les artistes et les scientifiques ne doit pas se penser comme une simple complémentarité d'expertise autour d'un même objet, mais plutôt comme une communauté de savoir, une communauté vivante de savoir qui accepte de se mettre à l'épreuve du temps et de l'expérience. Donc je laisse la parole à Serge afin qu'il puisse présenter Günter Berghaus, le premier intervenant.
Merci Gaïdig. Bonjour à tous. Je vais commencer aussi par remercier Anne Dopfer, la direction du Musée national Marc Chagall, pour leur accueil et leur hospitalité. Gaïdig, je vous ai déjà un peu parlé de la thématique du jour. Donc, bon, je n'ai pas grand-chose à dire de plus, d'autant que je laisserai volontiers la parole dans un instant à Günter Berghaus, que je vais présenter rapidement. C'est à propos du rapport entre art et science dont il va être question dans un instant, dans le cadre du mouvement qui a probablement, à mon avis, marqué le XXe siècle et qui restera probablement associé à cette période, c'est-à-dire les avant-gardes. C'est à ce propos dont nous allons parler dans un instant. Personne ne pouvait le faire mieux que Günter Berghaus, que je remercie d'être avec nous aujourd'hui. Günter a commencé à travailler dans les années 70 sur le théâtre baroque notamment, et puis progressivement, notamment avec la poursuite de ses études en Angleterre, il a non seulement approfondi ses études théâtrales d'un point de vue anthropologique, mais également il s'est concentré sur d'abord le théâtre des avant-gardes et du futurisme en particulier, et puis il a élargi son propos à l'idéologie de ces avant-gardes et progressivement, je dirais que c'est devenu un des grands maîtres, un des grands historiens, un des grands spécialistes de l'avant-garde des années 10, 20, 30, non seulement en Italie, mais également en Russie, et puis progressivement, et notamment depuis une quinzaine d'années, le travail qu'il a accompli avec ses volumes sur les Futurist Yearbooks sont devenus essentiels dans l'étude du rayonnement de l'avant-garde futuriste dans le monde entier. Donc depuis une quinzaine d'années, tous les ans, un de ces volumes paraît qui met en lumière la présence qui en France est sous-évaluée de la première avant-garde du XXe siècle, de la première avant-garde chronologiquement active et influente, non seulement en Europe, mais en Amérique du Sud, dans le monde asiatique et sur tous les continents à peu près. C'est vrai aussi pour l'Afrique du Nord. Voilà, donc je laisse la parole à Günter, en le remerciant encore une fois pour sa présence. Voilà, c'est à toi.
Thank you very much. Well, the topic of this conference, arts and science, I should like to make a contribution to our discussion with a presentation on Italian futurism. Now, probably all of you know Italian futurism was an art movement where science and technology played a very major role. And because of this, I have spent not only years but decades, trying to investigate the many different facets of this interaction between science and technology and futurism. And a couple of years ago, I organized a conference in Helsinki, and as a little publicity exercise pro bono, you find there some leaflets of a book that resulted from that conference, which is called Futurism and the Technological Imagination. And more recently, actually here in France, in Rennes, I organized another conference, and that was focused more on futurism and science. And the papers, plus a few more that resulted from that conference, I edited in a special issue of Yearbook that just been mentioned. And I can give you there are another sort of dozen essays that discuss different aspects of science in the futurist movement. So basically what I'm talking about today, to me, is very familiar territory. But futurism being futurism, when you really start digging, you always come across things that you think, wow, I didn't really think that they already did it at that time. So in my presentation today, I will be talking about something that also for me was a real discovery, and I'm sure you probably also find that this is just something one just doesn't know enough about, so one really needs to keep digging and explore futurism more and more and more from many different angles. So in the 45 minutes I shall discuss how Filippo Tommaso Marinetti, and with him a whole host of futurist artists, combined their utopian quest for a fusion of art and life with concrete investigations that made use of the scientific method of experimentation. Now, much has been written about futurist technophilia, but much less about how science influenced futurist artists and served them as a source of inspiration. And in fact, one can say that the often assumed bipolarity of art and science was transformed by the futurists into a strategy where the two were actually conjoined in a dynamic union that had as its ultimate aim a fusion of art and life. And I shall outline in my presentation how science and technology inspired Marinetti to formulate a vision of a humanity transformed by the forces of modernity. And I shall draw in this on dozens of manifestos in which this quest was formulated, but also on concrete works of art, in which this quest was given a concrete realization. Now, because my time is limited, I have chosen one particular facet of Marinetti's vision of a technologically advanced future, the uomo moltiplicato, which is a humanity enhanced or extended by technological means. And I want to show how the futurists adopted the form of technology that had emerged in the late 19th century, namely prosthetics, and established an artistic practice that can be regarded as a bridge between the 19th and the 21st century. And thus I hope to demonstrate that the futurist quest for a union of art and life and a merger of art and science and the concrete investigations undertaken in this field had a utopian character that prefigured phenomena that only became a reality some 100 years later, i.e. in our era. And I want to begin my talk with some reflections on the genesis of futurism, i.e. what predates futurism. The founder of the movement, Filippo Tommaso Marinetti, was brought up, as you probably all know, in Alexandria in Egypt. And I want to talk a little bit about the world that Marinetti encountered when he was living basically in a pre-modern Oriental society. He went to school there in a Jesuit college, and he received an intellectual training that was in accordance with the religious and philosophical principles that very clearly belonged to a pre-modern and a pre-industrial age. The Marinetti family lived close to the Mahmoudiya Canal. I have a little photograph from the period when Marinetti lived there. And this canal had the function of supplying Alexandria with fresh water from the Nile. And like many other public works of such a vast scale, the most important and best known nowadays is probably the Suez Canal, suggests that the Khedive government was attempting to pull Egypt into the modern age. Yet, despite such objectives, the living surroundings that Marinetti encountered as a young man was still that of a pre-modern Oriental society. Again, typical street scenes from Alexandria at the time where Marinetti lived there. And Marinetti himself, in his memoirs, remembers this period and described the environment in which he grew up, and I quote, as mud-caked buffaloes, narrow streets of villages paved with sun-baked excrements, squawking hens, and bristle-haired dogs. So when, as an adolescent, Marinetti came to Europe, he really discovered a new world. In 1894, he was sent to Paris to take his baccalaureate, and he was able to see some of the great changes that had been brought about by the Industrial Revolution. He marveled at the wonders of technology displayed in Paris, and I want to show you a couple of slides just to remind you what we are talking about when we talk about the world that Marinetti encountered at the end of the 19th century. He encountered a Paris that had been partially razed to the ground in order to make way for the Grand Boulevard. Here you see the demolition of Butte de Moulins in 1870, and then the Boulevard des Italiens when it was finally completed. Countless visitors described Paris as the city of light, due to the new means of illumination that could be found everywhere, on the streets and in public buildings, and increasingly also in private dwellings. Paris was also the city of modern means of transportation, which after all had already gone through half a century of development in Europe. Trains, therefore, played a major role for the infrastructure of Paris, as did the 90 omnibus and 35 tramway lines. Then we really must remember that Paris was also the city of modern consumer capitalism. As you can see on this image of the Au Printemps department store, or the Ville de Saint-Denis, which even featured an indoor elevator. Then Paris was known as the city where electricity had mutated from a fairground curiosity, this is an image from 1844, to something that had become a public spectacle. This is the Palais d'Électricité, I think in the 1880s, if I remember right. Now, as many contemporary documents show, Paris in the 1890s was seized by what was described by contemporaries as an electromania. Here you can see a poster for a share company, which in 1899 raised some 5 million francs to build electric power relays in France and in Belgium. Electricity was also celebrated in books, both in fiction, here on the right, and in historical accounts, the history of electricity. Then Paris was a city where Marinetti encountered the modern means of communication. For example, the phonograph. There on the left, you see a demonstration by Henri Lioré at the Trocadero in 1897, and on the right, a plaque for the Pathé phonograph, which won a golden medal at the Exposition Universelle of 1900. Then the great invention, which also played a major role in futurism, is the telephone. Here, a telephone exchange, as depicted in Le Petit Journal Paris in April 1904. And then Paris was the city where the world presented the newest inventions and achievements, as in the Galerie des Machines at the World Fair in 1889, or the Palais d'Électricité at the World Fair of 1900. So I'll stop here because I could go on now for another hour. This is just to serve as a very brief visual introduction to show you why Paris, more so than any other capital of the industrialized world, exemplified for Marinetti the modern city per se. And after having taken his baccalaureate, he will have left France with one image deeply imprinted on his mind, and that is Paris vécu, le moderne style. Marinetti's futurism was, at least in part, based on a very close observation of the great transformations brought about by science and technology. The scientific culture of the late 19th, early 20th century exercised a formative power on him and configured much of the technophilia and modernolatry that he confessed in so many of his writings. It is important here to underline that in the early 20th century, The two cultures of science and humanities were not yet driven apart by educational structures that we take for granted nowadays, to such a degree that it is rare nowadays to find someone with a knowledge in the humanities who also has a profound knowledge in science. Writers like Marinetti were much better informed about the world of science than their 21st century readers, i.e. many of the references we simply do not understand because we who read things like Marinetti lack knowledge, whereas Marinetti in his time, he could take that knowledge for granted. His compatriots knew a hell of a lot more about what was topical in the science of the period than we would know nowadays. And when we examine the creative and theoretical works of futurist artists, we notice how fruitful the contact between arts and science was at that period. Domenico Pietropaolo has investigated the convergence of science and aesthetics in Italian futurism and has come to the conclusion that Marinetti's routine references to electricity, light, and electromagnetic waves demonstrate how intimately related the conception of futurism was to popular science. And in my view, it was exactly because of this scientific approach that futurist artists were able to extract themselves from the restraints imposed on art by academic tradition and to pursue their quest for novel artistic expressions that were in tune with the modern age. Marinetti believed that art had to be liberated from the old models of creativity in order to play a significant role in fashioning a culture of the future. As he explained to Felix Del Mal, art had the twin function of offering, I quote, an enthusiastic glorification of scientific discoveries and of modern machines, and of providing the widest possible formula for renewal, end of quote. Thus, art could function as an anthropological laboratory in which the artist, and I quote again, would mold everything around us and endlessly regenerate the face of the earth. And in countless manifestos, Marinetti outlined his vision of an art that charts future scenarios and generates prototypes of a forthcoming global revolution. Dozens of references to eminent as well as little-known scientists show that the physical interpretation of reality, from the smallest theory of matter to the largest models of the cosmos, offered Marinetti assistance and encouragement in his aesthetic representation of a rapidly changing world. He absorbed from scientific books and magazines a large number of ideas and approaches for his artistic program of futurism. An often detailed knowledge of scientific ideas fired his enthusiasm and generated aesthetic concepts that were fundamental for futurist art: speed, dynamism, simultaneity, vibration, a distorted time-space nexus, and so on and so on. In fact, I could give a lecture on each of these topics and talk about, the scientific discoveries at the time and how they were transformed into these new aesthetic concepts and devices. But I would like to emphasize that science did not only offer mind-expanding knowledge, it also provided Marinetti with an approach to the creative process that has become vital for 20th century art practice. Marinetti and many of his fellow futurists gleaned from the sciences an experimental methodology and applied this to the field of art. And thus they bequeathed to other avant-garde movements the fundamental principle of experimentalism. Now, in the science, as you probably all know, experiments have the purpose of exploring unknown phenomena, correcting previous knowledge, and acquiring new information. They involve the systematic observation and measurement of processes in a carefully controlled environment, and the formulation, testing, and modification of hypotheses. So experimentalism is of crucial importance in scientific investigations. In the arts, experimentalism is the opposite of academism. Instead of following the rules and principles taught by the revered masters in the academy, avant-garde artists pursue a quest for the unknown that leads to unpredictable results. And similarly, futurist experimentalism defied traditions, canons, and doctrines. Futurist art stepped into a terra incognita, mapped out a new terrain, and produced surprising discoveries and breakthrough innovations. And as an example, I want to mention one such experiment that had fundamental consequences for the development of abstract art, and that is Ballard's iridescent interpenetrations. These paintings were a form of investigation based on strictly scientific principles, begun in 1912 in Düsseldorf. And they were concerned with optics, light and reflections, color sensations, the human perceptive apparatus, and the mental process of viewing and its relation to consciousness. The images were research and analysis, but also a ludic play, and thus a great contribution to the history of abstract art. And furthermore, they served as a basis for a design project, the decor of the Villa Löwenstein. That was the reason why Ballard was in Düsseldorf in 1912. And it is not quite clear, as far as I know, what actually came first, art or science. Whether an aesthetic goal informed Ballard's scientific investigations, or maybe vice versa. There are so many multiple connections between the design project, optical science, and then these paintings, that it is likely that Ballard pursued all three things at the same time and allowed them to interpenetrate each other. So interpenetration also on that level. During the first phase of the Futurist movement, Marinetti presented the machine as a vehicle for overcoming the restrictions of a given nature and for unleashing the emancipatory qualities of a created nature. He poured all his positivist, optimistic thinking into this ideological vessel. Science and technology were portrayed as tools for abolishing nature's domination over the human race. Through the machine, the human being would become a demiurge who creates a nature that is superior to the nature created by God. The futurist machine age was to bring about nothing less than a complete refashioning of the universe, both in material terms and in the social sphere. By overcoming the restrictions imposed by nature and society, and by harnessing the enormous potential for a fully mechanized economy, men and women were to discover and unfold their creative potential. Marinetti wrote, I quote, that futurism was a new way of seeing the world, the enthusiastic glorification of scientific discoveries and of modern machines. However, his focus was not just directed to the present. Marinetti was constantly seized by what he called the delirium of becoming and an obsessive vision of the future. He presented in an imaginative and original manner the drift towards a technologically advanced future that stood in contrast to what he considered to be the rancid past. And therefore, in his creative as well as in his theoretical writings, Marinetti could envisage some of the forthcoming achievements in the fields of anthropology, sociology, and science. And in the second part of my talk, I want to show how Marinetti's new man and the futurist mechanical aesthetics were based on new technologies that were causing a profound anthropological mutation in the early 20th century. The concept of the extended man was greatly influenced by the development of artificial limbs, these prostheses that I mentioned. Now, I don't want to take you through the history of prosthetics, which, as you probably know, already began in antiquity and produced some remarkable examples in the early modern period. A few images may suffice to indicate that in the late 19th century, we are talking about a quite sophisticated field of experimental science. Okay, some of them may not have been all that sophisticated, but these artificial limbs were functional, and they allowed people to go about their daily business or even to become reintegrated into the workforce. In our contemporary world, prosthetics have evolved to such a degree that they put a disabled person into a position where they can surpass an able-bodied person. For example, the champion sportsmen generally nowadays feel the competition from so-called disabled athletes. And to such a degree that the South African sprinter Oscar Pistorius, who in 2008 nearly qualified for the Summer Olympics, was barred by the Court of Arbitration for Sports from participating, and the court declared that his prosthetic legs gave him an advantage over other athletes. And that's why they're disqualified from participating in any future IOC events. Now, in an amateur setting, it is still allowed that amputees can compete alongside able-bodied sportsmen in almost any discipline. And that is why in 1964 they founded the International Sports Organization for the Disabled, out of which major international multi-sport events evolved, including the Paralympic Games, which I'm sure you all have seen on television, and most recently the Cybathlon, an international competition for disabled athletes using bionic assistive technologies. But let's return to futurism and Marinetti's uomo moltiplicato. Marinetti envisaged a fusion of the organic and mechanical systems and ultimately an identification of man with a machine. And in the 1920s, this expanded into a vita moltiplicata, to use a term by Fedele Azzari. And in several manifestos, Azzari outlined his concept of a standardized man-machine who refashions his surroundings in line with the process of artistic evolution, i.e. art offers the model for science. And Azzari's art of the future is all-embracing. He had a particular interest in plants and what he called macchina essere vivente, i.e. a mechanical living being. Azzari describes in his manifestos a mechanized world that is peopled by robots that are equipped with computer brains and by artificial life forms that are fed on artificial nutrition. He saw the human being as a macchina ragionante, a reasoning machine that could be perfected for survival in a world where the natural fauna, flora and habitats have been replaced by man-made forms that overcome what he calls the imperfection, weakness and inconstancy of the organic world. And Azzari's concept of an artificial flora was developed to great height by Giacomo Balla. Here you see some of his artificial flowers, and by Bott, artist name of Osvaldo Barbieri, who published a book called Flora Futurista and who exhibited a large number of these creations, and I have some reconstructions here for an exhibition recently in Italy. Another artist for whom the mechanical living being became a lifelong preoccupation was Fortunato De Pero. De Pero's artificial being was presented in several ballets, performed, as he said, I quote, by automated contraptions that dance new and entertaining mimes. De Pero's macchinismo oscillated between magical playfulness and grotesque humor. And quite different in nature were the creations of Ivo Panaggi and Vinicio Palladini, who looked at a technologically based civilization from a prolet cult angle. They penned a manifesto in which they called for the working class to unite under the sign of the machine and to create a new civilization based on change, innovation, and progress. And to demonstrate what they meant by this, they organized and made this Ballo Meccanico Futurista, which was presented in 1922 at the Casa d'Arte Bragaglia in Rome. And this ballet featured a proletarian man-machine, a cross between a human and a mechanical being. And I'm showing you here a slide from production, a reconstruction of this ballo, which I organized in Bristol a couple of years ago. So when you look at theater of that kind, you notice that futurist theater had an important role to play in this futurist quest for a mechanical life of the future. And if there were more time, I could talk about a large number of these projects that functioned, I always say, as a kind of anthropological laboratory in which scenarios and prototypes of a forthcoming global revolution could be investigated. So this is really art as investigation. And in the remaining time that I have at my disposal, I want to have a look at how the futurist fusion of the two domains of art and life and the refashioning of the universe according to artistic principles predates some contemporary developments that combine science and aesthetics and have remarkable consequences for both art and life. By the 21st century, some 10% of the Western population qualify to be called a cyborg. 10% in the Western world are being kept alive by electronic pacemakers, made mobile by prosthetic limbs and synthetic joints, or interact with their surrounding world by means of hearing aids, ophthalmic accessories, and artificial larynxes. Ever more powerful human-machine interfaces, together with biotechnology and genetic engineering, have given rise to visions of conquering the physical and mental limitations of the human race. And one of the first artists to explore the consequences of a body being accessed and acted upon by cybernetic means was Stellark, artist name was Stelio Arcadi. He trained as a sculptor in Melbourne and was interested in the body as an architectural structure, as an object in various gravitational, electric, and magnetic states, or as a container of rhythms and flows of energy. He began his career as a performer in 1968, and in the 1970s introduced high-tech components into some of his body events. He was particularly interested in the human-machine interface and the hybridization of the body with new technologies. And in his performances, he extended the physical capacities of the body by making the machine a component of the body and the body a component of the machine. And I want to show you two videos, two very brief excerpts on two performances to give you an idea what that looked like on stage. Okay, this is just a brief glimpse to give you an idea what that looks like on stage. Stellark's aesthetics of the prosthetics was inspired, like Marinetti's futurist dream, by Lamarck. He wanted to create a redesigned human body, or as he once said, a synthesis of organic and synthetic systems to create a new hybrid human, one that can evolve with Lamarckian speed. And a similar type of human being has emerged in recent years in the world of popular culture, where young women with physical impairments have been catapulted into star cult status. Can we go back to the slides? I'll show you a slide of Victoria Modesta. Yeah. This is Victoria Modesta, a singer, songwriter, performance artist, and fashion model. And in 2007, she had a leg amputation and subsequently became the first bionic pop artist known for challenging the modern perception of feminine beauty. And I would now like to show you very brief clips of a performance. Okay, that's Victoria Modesta. Another star who needs to be mentioned here is the athlete and the double amputee Amy Mullins. Alexander McQueen sent her in 1999 onto the catwalk with intricately carved legs resembling Victorian boots. Here she is, with her Victorian boots that subsequently she kept in her collection of artificial limbs. And when Mullins featured on the covers of style magazines such as Elle, Vogue, ID, and Dazed, her career diversified. She acted in Matthew Barney's film Cremaster 3. Nick Knight shot her for the Pirelli calendar. She was elected president of the Women's Sports Foundation, and she served on the board of numerous non-profit sports organizations. And a number of other designers followed suit and gave disabled women an opportunity to pursue a modeling career or to achieve a breakthrough into pop stardom. Here's Rebecca Marine with her artificial arm, and again Victoria Modesta with her spike. Some of them used their success for branching out into photographic modeling. Here's again Amy Mullins in a report for Icon magazine, and Rebecca Marine in an advert for Saw Studios. The increased presence of women with physical impairments in popular media has meant that the donna multiplicata has attracted the interest of style gurus. Here are two examples. Sarah Rainerton at the top and Amy Winters at the bottom, who took to artificial limbs as a medium that served both artistic and practical purposes. And another example, Sophie de Oliveira Barata. Now, Marinetti explained in Extended Man and the Kingdom of the Machine that he was promoting the love of the machine, not just in a metaphorical sense. He asked his readers, and I quote, "Have you ever watched an engine driver lovingly washing the great powerful body of his machine? He uses the same little acts of tenderness and close familiarity as the lover when caressing his beloved." End of quote. Marinetti's notion of eroticism was anything but typical of his age. He once declared in an interview with Commedia that he wanted, I quote, "to combat the tyranny of love by replacing sentimental affection with other forms of passion." And one of them he demonstrated in Poupée électrique, in which a man, who, by the way, in the second edition is called Riccardo Marinetti, feels erotically charged in the presence of artificial and mechanical beings. And these puppets stimulate his predilection for an amorous electricity that makes our nerves vibrate like conducting wires of lust. That's how he explains this man in the play. And such a prodigious stimulant of the heart was for him futurist because, again I quote, it deceives and kills the slow, the old, the fearful, the stationary. And another form of futurist passion he presented in chapter 10 of Come si seducono le donne, in which women are encouraged to seek the sexual company of mutilated soldiers because, I quote, surgery has already started a great transformation and a physiological revolution. Steel and flesh have been conjoined. Steel has been humanized and the flesh of the extended man has been metallized. The body is now a motor with different parts that are interchangeable and replaceable. End of quote. And in view of such literary representations of a futurist sexuality, it is likely that Marinetti would have applauded when mutilated women present themselves openly as sexually attractive beings. And I show you just two typical examples, Rebecca Marine on her Facebook page, or again Amy Mullins on the website DeviantArt. So, I'm coming to my conclusion now. There was always a tendency in Marinetti to see in the machine a metaphysical force, and not just a symbol of technological progress. His creative writings and manifestos document a quest for a utopian existence where art and life have been fused by means of science and technology. Here the machine is a cosmic, is a divine force that enables the human race to fulfill its creative potential and to grow beyond a commonplace humdrum existence. The extended man, described in Marinetti's manifestos, became a key facet of futurist anthropology and was explored in novels, plays, theater productions, and works of fine art. It was inspired by Lamarck's theory of transformism and organic evolution, and saw in prosthetics an intermediate step towards an incalculable number of human transformations, and ultimately the creation of a non-human species. When Marinetti declared that in human flesh wings lie dormant, he was formulating a utopian dream. However, it was an ideal that was based on prototypes, and it was a vision that led to some remarkable works of art. Whereas in the 19th century, prosthetics copied the members it was supposed to replace, in modern prosthetics, the medical engineer who has understood the functional principles of the body is able to surpass the biological model. This means that the prosthesis, which was once considered a sign of a defect or even a handicap, has now become an asset the wearer would not hide but exhibit with pride. Futurist art did not only seek to fuse arts and science, but also art and life. Science and technology are usually considered functional, but in the hands of the futurists, they became a source of aesthetic inspiration. And similarly, these prostheses created by Sophie de Oliveira Barata are not only technical, but also aesthetic marvels. A futurist would say they are works of art inspired by science, but contributing towards an optimized human existence. Therefore, they have a function in life. Art and life meet here. They demonstrate that Marinetti's quest for an art inspired by science has finally found some astounding realizations in our 21st century world. Thank you very much.